Good evening, everyone. We'd like to call this meeting of the West Dallas West Milwaukee School District to order, please. If we could please rise for the pledge, and Mr. Lee, could you please lead us?
Certainly. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. If we could do roll call, please.
Ms. Klug.
Here.
Mr. Schultz.
Here.
Mrs. Kaiser.
Here.
Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Ustruck.
Here.
Mrs. Justum.
Here.
Mr. Sikich.
Present.
Mr. Keller. I believe he will join soon. And President Emmons.
Here. Proper notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the open meeting laws of the state of Wisconsin. Do we have any additions or modifications to tonight's agenda, Dr. Lexman?
I have nothing this evening.
All right, we'll move on to item 6 on our agenda this evening, public comment. If there's anyone online, there's no one here in person to make public comment. If there's anyone online to make public comments, if you please introduce yourself, and we will take public comments at that time. I will wait a minute until anyone speaks up. Okay. Seeing no public comments, we'll move on to item 7, superintendent's report. Dr. Lexman?
Thank you and good evening, everyone. We'll start with 7.1, which is our return to school update. So let me share my screen here. And present. All right. So as we do with each of our regular school board meetings, we've been doing an update. So this is our December 7th update for our returning to school plan. Not much has changed since the last time we met. Last time we met, we talked about that we would be committing to remaining virtual through the end of the first semester, and we have communicated that. But we are starting to kind of look beyond first semester now and what that might mean as the opportunity with vaccinations really starts to roll out, what that means for us in terms of getting kids back to school, which I'm now more hopeful than ever that it will happen at some point in second semester, if not some kids at the beginning. So we'll touch on with our agenda here a little bit of the health metric update. We've done some adjusting to it that'll explain our internal metrics we always touch on, and then kind of where we are with our virtual learning through first semester, and then next steps. So the good news, if there is good news in all of this right now, is that you'll notice in metrics 1 and 2 for December 1st, we've reversed the progress that has been happening, meaning things have been getting worse, going up, and now they've come down a bit. And in the percent positivity for Milwaukee County, metric 3, they've come down, and for West Dallas, West Milwaukee, 2 weeks in a row. The one thing I think is important to point out here, this is without any impact of what may come from the Thanksgiving travel and gatherings. Right, so that's a big unknown here, and that's going to be another week, 2 weeks before we see the impact. Hopefully there's not one, and things continue to get better. The other thing I want to point out here is under metric 2 for December 1st, there's a different color of red that's been included, and that's really the next slide that I want to explain. We've adjusted a little bit to the exact kind of color coding and kind of the cutoff points in COVID burden rate that the state and our local health department are now using. And we thought we should, just so it's clear for everybody that we stay in alignment in the way we're communicating exactly where we are. And so this is this slide is now in the new health metrics dashboard that's linked through our returning to school website. And it explains a little bit where the different cut scores are now, and then the color coding. And that's why you saw in that last slide, what had been kind of critically high now fell into, a little bit lighter red, or not as bright of a red. And that indicates that, things have improved a bit. And if you think about what we've set for our returning to school for at least phase 2, we would need to get into the orange and yellow in metrics 1 and 2, right? And we go back here, right? The yellow now aligns, and that was not aligned in the past. We simply had green, yellow, and red. And I did get questions here and there from parents about, why do I see this at the state level? Why do you have these colors? So we thought it made sense just from a communication standpoint to be consistent and line it all up. And so that's what we've done here. And moving forward, these colors are what we published more than a month ago now. But it now just makes more sense that all of the color coding is aligned for anybody that's looking at our documents. And then our internal metrics, fairly stable. The staff active positive cases from, oh, sorry, I did not change the date on the top of the slide again. I missed that. From last week, so this would be last week, Friday, we had 6 positive cases among staff, 30 close contact, 5 were work-related, which is pretty good. And then 32 that are being monitored. And students, 7 positive, 65 close contact, 25 school-related, all in our either interscholastic athletics or junior programs, and then 69 that are being monitored. And that had been a very low number, or 0, I think, if we look back a couple weeks. But again, all of this is published week by week in our health metrics dashboard. And the fact that, you know, we're not in class means this stays fairly stable for us from week to week, at least at this point. So then really a little bit about kind of where we are, continuing to move forward with our virtual learning, and adapting plans as need be. And, you know, here and there, we still have parents that find it overwhelming that we're trying to replicate actual school in a virtual environment. And we're advising principals to work with teachers and adapt plans for kids so that if kids need to take a break, we build that in. And we're continuing to evolve the way we've approached this. But we also know that for some kids and some families, they're doing better. And it's interesting that, you know, nationally there's concerns about failure rates and those kind of things, but here and there are bright spots. And so, you know, the board's aware that we're working on potentially launching our own virtual charter school. And there's a lot of activity in that space across the state right now. And, you know, we lose more than $1 million per year with students that live in our communities that enroll to virtual charter schools in other parts of the state, some, you know, way north in the state. And given that we already have students that are in our district that choose that option, and we think there'll be some families that now find this a better option, there'll be demand for us. And we're hoping that we can continue to meet the needs of the families that are with us right now virtually, and maybe attract some of the families that have opted to leave. We think our version of a virtual charter school might be unique because it'll align to our vision around deeper learning. And it may include some face-to-face interaction, so project weeks or the public displays of learning where we want students and families to actually come to us. So that's kind of where we are with kind of looking at virtual learning right now and what it might transition to going forward. But then our next steps, we're going to continue to review our plans with the West Allis Health Department. I did share at our last meeting that the health department had asked us to meet with them to review our winter sports. And I was concerned that they may be recommending that we would end all sports or cancel some. That wasn't the case at all. And so I wanted to clarify that in this presentation. And what they asked for, which I thought was a really smart move, is we had a situation where a student had been exposed to somebody positive, an athlete, and showed up before we were aware, and without the parents understanding what their responsibilities were at that point, showed up to weigh in at a wrestling meet. And we cut up with it after the weigh-in, so the student did not participate. But it's one of those moments we know there will be gaps in processes and systems, and we thought it was smart for the health department to gather us all around the table and essentially do an after-action review, like what happened and what do we need to make sure we don't have that gap show up again. So it was a twofold approach that we came up with. One is more consistent in communicating with parents and now on a regular basis, even weekly, about if this happens, meaning you get exposed to a positive person or a student test positive, here's what you do. So that's one way to make sure we don't have that same situation. And then the other is expanding internally who knows what when about whom. And it's always sensitive information because of HIPAA, but we want to do as much as we can to stop transmission. So sharing information gets to be really important in that effort. We're going to be developing a variation of our plan, and I've talked about this already, to focus on 4K, 5K, 6th grade, 9th grade. Last time I talked about this, I said 8th grade, sorry, 9th grade. So the kids in transition years. And we're talking also maybe about possibly 12th grade as a kind of maybe phase 1.5, just because 12th graders, it's their last year of high school, their last year with us, and they've had so little that's normal, that if there are ways for us to start with smaller groups, even smaller than we envisioned in our phase 2, that's what we're going to talk with our health department about in the coming weeks. And then we're finalizing some video messages. And so these are to line up with the questions that have been consistent around. So what are the cleaning protocols when we do get back into buildings? How does contact tracing work? And then how does bus transportation work? And we have a contract with a local agency that does our really kind of documentary style videos about the work we're doing in our schools and with deeper learning. And so a little bit of that contract we've used to produce some of these kind of public service announcement type commercials. So that'll be ready to go whenever we hit that phase 1.5 or 2. And then if you've been watching in the last few days, the CDC has released new guidance around quarantine expectations. And we had a meeting today with the health department and our school nurses. And we're aligning with the approach the West Dallas Health Department is taking. And the approach we're going to take is we're still going to message that best practice is quarantine for 14 days. And if an employee or a student says, well, yeah, but the CDC says I can do it in 10, then our expectation is you have to comply with all of the self-reporting of symptoms every single day. And if we have families that say, well, we're not going to do that, you can't make us, then we're going to say you have to quarantine for 14 days. And so we're really going to, and we talked quite a bit this morning about, do we have the internal capacity to monitor all of it? And our team felt we did. So if somebody says, I want to be on the 10-day return to work or return to athletics, we have the capacity to make sure that we do that well. So that's kind of where we've landed it, and the health department was comfortable with that approach. So that's where we are with our returning to school plan at this point. So I typically pause here, Stephanie. So if you see any questions from board members, I'm happy to take those.
I gotta get back to the grid here so I can see more people.
Yep.
I don't see any hands raised at the moment.
Okay.
Go on.
Then we'll go on to 7.2, which is the legislative update. I'm sure board members, you're watching what Assembly Republicans have introduced as a COVID-19 proposal. So Assembly Speaker Voss and Assembly Republicans announced a package to address the pandemic. The package includes a variety of items. The ones that involve education are the ones we're going to just are highlighted in the bullets here. It creates a $100 million fund to respond to the public health emergency. It would double the number of local public health staff working on COVID-19 response, which would very much help our health departments and us in the contact tracing work. Offer weekly rapid antigen tests for home use, and testing, if we're going to be back in school, would be really helpful. It establishes limited liability for schools, businesses, and local governments, and that's a question that comes up frequently as we take various steps. It reestablishes personal electronic computing device grants for schools. That would be a $9 million fund if it's all approved. It'll require teacher instruction from school buildings by the end of January. There are some exceptions to that. And that right now, at least, seems to align with where we intend, or hope, I shouldn't say intend to be, where we hope to be at the beginning of the second semester. So that's the end of January. And if we start returning some students to schools, and if the requirement is all teachers have to instruct from school buildings, that would seem to be a transition point that makes sense for us. It would require school board approval of virtual instruction by 2/3 vote of the board for virtual instruction to continue beyond January 11, 2021. Well, I don't believe the legislature is meeting until January at this point, so I have no idea what will come of that requirement. If that passes, that date probably shifts, and we'll comply with it if it is in fact turned into law. But right now, we're following, the plan that the board supported in this past summer. And then it would call for us providing payments to parents of $371, which is half of the per pupil increase for the year for students who have had at least 50% virtual instruction since September. And so that would be quite a hit to our budget if, in fact, this passes. This has a long way to go, and there is quite a bit of pushback in education circles around some of the items that are proposed here. And then going on, our governor announced a new public health emergency. So on November 20th, he signed Executive Order 95, declaring a new public health emergency that lasts for 60 days until January 19th, 2021. Unless the governor ends it, the legislature comes in and votes to end it, or a lawsuit currently pending before the Wisconsin Supreme Court says Evers doesn't have the authority to declare it. And so we're waiting on all of those fronts. Our governor also signed a statewide mask order that stays in place until January 19th, 2021. And again, kind of the dates we're targeting where we may have a shift in phases, and the dates, that are rolling out in terms of where the legislature may be and where the governor is, start to align for us. And so we're hoping things come together in a way where we feel it's safe to bring kids back and all of these pieces fit. And so, Jeff, I see Jeff.
Yeah, just a quick question, Marty. When I started reading a bunch of this, when this first came out, whatever that was last week, they talked about that the 2/3 vote by the school board would have to be taken every 2 weeks. Is that still in there?
Yes, that's correct. That is still in there. So thank you. Yes, we would have to come back twice a month. We'd be voting on do we stay virtual. So thank you. That's it's a good clarification, and it's helpful for the board. Yep. And so 7.3 are our Board of Education recognitions for this week. So at Longfellow Elementary School, the 4th and 5th grade teams worked to create a school-based pantry. The students advertised, reached out to community members, and connected to retailers to solicit donations. Students received generous donations and raised $600 to continue to stock the pantry. They also provided 16 families with Thanksgiving baskets. And the 2nd and 3rd grade team at Longfellow organized a supply drive for the Salvation Army. After a Salvation Army sergeant spoke with the students, virtually, of course, came to virtual class, they put out specific lists and received generous donations from the community. And then at West Allis Central, this is huge for one of our young people. Alyssa Matthews, senior at West Allis Central High School, has been matched with Northwestern University via Quest Bridge. And as a result, she will receive a full ride to Northwestern University to study biomedical engineering. And so she is heading in a much needed direction these days. And we're super proud of her, and really proud of the work of all of the teachers at Central that are making this dream possible. And then at Shared Journeys, the staff, along with Pastor Kathy Manthe at Apostle Presbyterian, and church members John Delaney, who is a former staff member at Shared Journeys, and Pam Dowling, who is a governing board member, prepared and delivered 9 Thanksgiving meals along with personal hygiene items and baby items for the Shared Journeys Hale Central Dotke families that are served at Shared Journeys. At West Milwaukee Intermediate School, special thanks to reading teacher Kelly Schmidt for working with 7th grader Journey Handy, and we mentioned this before, to write a grant proposal for Character Playbook Community Impact Grant. So Journey was selected out of the 40 applicants to present her plan for an outdoor classroom in front of representatives from the United Way and the Green Bay Packer organization. And after her review, Journey was the recipient of a $500 grant for her school. And so we're looking forward to see what she does with that grant. And then in Recreation and Community Service Department, we want to recognize Mission Barbecue in West Allis for donating lunches on November 24th, 2020 to all of our staff working at camps, and thank Amanda Schwittenberg for organizing the event. It's cool to see that we have, retailers and restaurants in our community that are supporting us through all of this. And we also want to thank the Zeman Family Foundation, Steve Cosner and Sodexo, and Deidre and her team So Target in West and the Target in West Allis and all of our district staff that are working with us to make the annual children's holiday shopping experience happen virtually this year. In our leadership check-in meeting this morning, Deidre gave us a little tour of part of her home where all of the little bags are starting to pile up for one school at a time as they figure out how to put this together and then get it back out to schools. So she's kind of a mini Amazon right now to figure out how to make this happen. So we really appreciate everybody that's contributing to this. And then finally, from Leadership and Learning, we want to thank Lisa Sheedy, Haley Anderson, and Jesse Newmar for organizing food baskets for families at Thanksgiving. We also want to give a special thanks to Aggie's Bakery on Greenfield Avenue in West Allis for donating 25 pies. And when I heard that, they called us and said, we just want to donate pies. And it was at the very same moment we were trying to figure out, how to put these baskets together and what we were going to do about pie. And so I immediately called them back to thank them, because it was just a timing and a blessing that, comes at this time of year that we want to make sure we appreciate right away. So we really appreciate all of the local support that's coming through at this time of year. And then in 7.4, couple updates from me. They're pretty short this evening. There weren't any public comments on November 23rd, so nothing to follow up there. In the background, facility planning continues, and it's going to really start to pick up steam now. The FACT team membership, that's building, and so principals are identifying a family and a staff member to serve on this big body. It's going to be 40 to 50 people. There are some community members from West Allis and West Milwaukee, as well as some leadership from the village or the city is on the team, along with 2 board members. And so that group is getting ready to go. We are doing an upcoming review with our architects and engineers of the various parameters that we want to communicate to the FACT committee about when they start reviewing ideas and options. What are some of the parameters they want to follow? And then what are the possible pathways? So what are possible solutions that we're going to review? And then that'll all go to a board workshop on January 11th for input from the whole board and refining any of that information. And then that all goes into the first FACT committee meeting, which is on January 12th. And then that team meets every 3 weeks on a Tuesday. And that is now going to be a consistent meeting to work through the entire process that gets from, 7, 8 ideas of how we might answer the question of, how many schools do we need and where should they be? And how do we get the schools our students and community deserves, right? And that would eventually lead to a proposal that would come back with some recommendations for the full board to consider. And then finally, at this time, I just want to encourage everyone to support our students as they really work hard to do the kind of community outreach that, was included in the recognitions, but there are more going on right now. And even when, school is all virtual, we still have clubs and activities running. All of their meetings take place virtually. And then when they need to do events like coming together to put food baskets or gift baskets together, we've worked out routines with the health department that allow for social distancing and mask wearing, but still to provide the support our community needs, especially when things are so hard and it's the holidays. And so we know there's upcoming food drives, there's upcoming toy drives, and of course, there's more drives for the Salvation Army. So I just wanted to encourage people when they hear about those things to support and drive by a school location and drop things off if you can. And so that concludes the superintendent's report.
Thanks, Dr. Lessman. All right, we move on to item 8, the board president's report, taking a look at the board calendar. So today, December 7th, we do have a regular Board of Education meeting, and immediately following, we do a financial stability and efficiency workshop on our budget calendar. Next Monday, December 14th at 6 p.m., we have a regular Board of Education meeting. Immediately following that, a college and career readiness workshop on the school improvement plans and panorama results. Then immediately following that workshop, we will have a closed session. We'll be on winter break from December 21st through January 1st. Classes will resume on January 4th. And the board will get together again on Monday, January 11th at 6 p.m. for a regular Board of Education meeting. And then we will have a few workshops after that same night, financial stability and efficiency. on open enrollment seats and the overview of the facility capacity study that Dr. Lexman just referenced. Monday, January 18th at 6 p.m., we have a workshop meeting on our Neola policy review. And on Monday, January 25th at 6 p.m., our regular Board of Education meeting. Any board members have any updates, community updates to present? All right, we move on to our consent agenda this evening. Item 9, there's 3 items on the consent agenda. Item 9.1, the approval of the minutes from the November 23rd meeting and the special board meeting on November 30th, the employment summary, and the supplementary contract. Does anyone need anything separated? Now we would look for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Great, those passed. Thank you very much. All right, we'll move on to our action items for this evening. Item 10.1 are the waivers to length of school day, instructional hours, school attendance enforcement, and regular instruction. Dr. Lexman and Ms. Raymer.
Yeah, I will turn this one right over to Deidre, who's become the expert on this unique process.
Good evening, everyone. So this is the actual approval for the application that we are going to submit to the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction for the 4 areas that we discussed both in board update and then had the public hearing on last week. So I am actually going to share screen and show you exactly what that application looks like, and then we'll post it within the minutes after tonight's meeting, assuming that there aren't any amendments that the board would ask us to do to this application, so that the public can be aware of exactly what we've requested. So it starts with just some identifying information and which schools that we are asking for that flexibility for. So obviously we've listed all the schools at this point. And then it has an abstract. And in our abstract, we talked about just the need to make some adjustments to the school day, with the intention of all of that work being to meet the needs of our learners and families. We have just chosen to support virtual instruction for this semester because we know that we're following the guidance of our local health department, and we've talked about that numerous times at our board meetings and within our greater community. So the abstract just gives some explanation as to why we are currently needing some flexibility. And part of that is due to wanting to give flexibility to our families. Some of that is due to some of what being in virtual and not wanting kids to have as much screen time, and balancing the needs of families with some more asynchronous time versus synchronous time, all of which counts towards attendance, but it impacts some other things. And yet still provide a ton of flexibilities to our families while maintaining the rigorous expectations that we have had. And then how we're adjusting those to just look really different right now. And then, so the abstract just kind of explains where we are and what we're doing. This next paragraph is the one where we explain why we have a need in this area. And so this one I'll read through and then answer any questions that you guys may have about it. And so we indicated that we're meeting the needs of students and families, have worked closely, sorry, I have to move you guys over, with our local, county, and health departments to make decisions that serve all our students. We have continued programming in Early College Now, advanced placement courses, social emotional learning, specialized instruction for students with special needs, specialized instruction for English language learners, reading and math supports, and general instruction, all with flexibility. And in order to do that, we've adjusted the length of the instructional day at elementary school to build in some asynchronous times, to build in some more planning time for students, which has altered slightly the length of the school day. In addition, the additional planning times and the Wednesdays where there's time to check and connect with the students at secondary have also meant that we will need some flexibility in the hours of instruction required by the Department of Public Instruction. The next area talks about attendance. And while we are still following through with attendance plans, we are doing home visits, we are working with the Department of Children and Families, we are working with our local SROs, we are working with RAP and other county agencies. We are not always following our general school attendance plan as outlined within our guidance in our school district. And therefore, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction requires us to follow the plan that we created. We are following as many parts of that plan with allowings for some flexibility, whereas we may not be referring students for truancy tickets or things like that in the same pattern that we normally would if we were in typical face-to-face instruction. So we're allowing some flexibility within the system, but still the expectation that our students are attending school regularly and then just following up with a lot of support when they're struggling, as we try to all survive this pandemic together. And then lastly, we're asking for some flexibility around regular instruction. So we are providing regular instruction in reading, math, science, social studies, art, music, physical education, career and technical education, and world language. But we're concerned with our ability to meet all of those requirements in each area to the fullest extent as required, both when we're in virtual and when we're in distance. And the sample that we gave last year at the hearing was the idea of PE, physical education, that it's required that we do it twice a week. And the third time is when they guide it on the recess playground to do more interactive things. Well, we've made some adjustments because given the pandemic, that wouldn't be as required. So therefore, we may not meet all of the requirements in that one small area for regular instruction. And then the rest of the application just lists, and you have all seen this before, and again, we'll post this for the public. It lists each of the areas for which you could choose to ask for a waiver. We are not choosing to ask for a waiver for any of the ones on this first page. And then we get into the 4 that we checked, which are length of the school day, hours of instruction, regular instruction, and then lastly, school attendance enforcement. And then the rest of the application is simply some signatures. So any questions for me about the application itself, or questions about some of where we've added our statement of need or some of what we're looking to do with our application?
Well,
I don't have any questions. I just noticed a typo in the first paragraph. You misspelled COVID. There was
Oh, okay, I will fix that. Thank
that's
you.
a good one.
In
I have
19,
fixed that several times. This document does not seem to want to save that, so I will fix it again before we send it in. Thank you very much.
the 19 should either be directly next to the D in COVID or hyphenated as well.
Okay. I will make that adjustment.
Any other comments or questions?
Move to approve the waiver.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any additional comments or questions? Those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, that passes. Thank you very much for the work on that. All right, move on to item 10.2, the 2020-2021 school calendar change proposal.
All right, I'll start this one and Deidre jump in along the way here. So it's a small change, and what we're proposing is to add a professional development day on January 26th. That's right at the beginning of the second semester. And the reason is really twofold. One is it's really feedback from school leaders around the need for some professional learning time with teachers, and in particular around some instructional strategies where they know, we would have normally spent quite a bit of time with our professional development days built into the calendar, but we don't have that time available this year because given kind of how odd and difficult this year is, we've provided those days as planning and work days for teachers. And so the 6 professional development days that are built into the calendar aren't available for professional learning. And so we wanted to provide that opportunity. So this would be a school planned professional development day that really aligns with their school improvement plan efforts. And the second reason is that if in fact, and I'm hoping, if in fact we are moving into some version of either phase 1.5 or phase 2, that one additional day in there before we have students actually coming back into our schools, because it is now 10 months since we've actually operated with kids in buildings. To have that one additional day in there to make sure we're ready to go would be helpful. So it's really those 2 reasons that we're asking to change the calendar. And because the board approves the calendar, if we're going to make any changes, we need the board's support to do that.
Can I just add one quick thing to that, Marty? One of the things that several of the teachers have also asked us for some additional time is just a short period of that day to be grade level planning across schools. And department planning across schools. We've had a lot of very positive feedback to adding that into our professional development days. And we have teachers that are currently missing that time with their third grade colleagues across our district or their fourth grade colleagues across our district, as we haven't had any of that time at professional development days this year. So we will build in a short period of time for some of that cross-district collaboration as well.
No?
I don't have any questions regarding the purpose of it. My question is regarding the placement of it. So it's on a Tuesday. Is that just because that's the first day of the new semester? Or is there another reason to place it on that Tuesday? Because I know historically we have problems with lower attendance on Mondays if we don't have student instruction on Tuesdays.
I don't remember what that Monday is. Is that the records day?
It's record
The
keeping day.
25th is a record keeping day for teachers. So that is a teacher work day. So we have the 25th, I just pulled up the calendar, already as a day of non-attendance for students.
Okay, so then we're making 2 days in a row.
It couples it with that one versus having families have a different break at another time.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Thought we look for a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any final questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? That passes. Thank you for that. Dr. Lexman, what will be the communication plan for that, since that is pretty quick?
Yeah, Beth is ready to go, so we'll get that out this week. There's been a change to this calendar, and if the board approves the next item, then we can announce these calendar things kind of all together.
All right, then we will move on to item 10.3, the 2021-2022 school calendar.
So it's great to be planning into the next year, and we're all going to assume that it will start and end as planned and as normal school years go. I'd gladly take all the odd things that happen during a normal school year just to get back into the routines of school. So it is a calendar that's pretty typical to what we've been doing in previous years. The big question always is, where does spring break land, right? That's always one of the pieces we go back and forth over. And what we've done a few years ago, we did some surveys for a couple of years, and our feedback was fairly consistent that the preference is to have spring break somehow attached to Easter. But Easter in 2022 is quite late, and that's never a preference for teachers because it just makes the stretch from the winter break to spring break really challenging, and for students as well. And so we didn't think that was a good solution for the 21-22 calendar. And then as we looked at where we are in facility planning, and if the recommendation is going to mean we go to a referendum asking for the community for support, well, that would likely land in the first week of April. So that's not a good week. And so then what made the most sense to us is we would introduce something we've been trying to do for several years, is try to align our spring break at least with our immediate neighbors. And that seems to have worked out in what we're proposing here. So the our immediate kind of neighboring school districts, Suzette did a little work and checked in, and sure enough, that's where they're landing spring break, which is the last full week of March. And so that's what we're proposing for spring break. The other changes in the calendar that are worth noting is we have in the last few years been scheduling professional development days on dates of elections, on dates where there's voting. And the reason we've been doing that is out of safety concerns, and in particular safety concerns in our elementary schools that are used as polling places. And just in this day and age, to have random people walking into elementary schools and there's not a lot of supervision, we think it's just not a risk worth taking. So we scheduled PD days on those days, so there aren't students in schools at least. So that takes care of the safety concern issue, but it created its own problem of attendance on the Monday before the Tuesday where there's voting. And we knew that would likely be the case. And sure enough, that plays out in our data that some families then choose to take that as a long weekend, essentially. So students are out Monday and Tuesday and then come back on the Wednesday. And given that the city now is, in our work with them and Beth's in particular, and given even what's happened with COVID, they condensed polling places into 4. So using FOW Lane, so 2 intermediate schools, Central and Hale, 2 high schools. And so with the move to just intermediate and high schools, we have fewer safety concerns with older kids. In at least in the plan right now at FOW Lane and Hale, the polling location in our building is quite isolated, and that works pretty well. We're still working through the best solution at Central, because it had been in the kind of foyer vestibule outside of the auditorium, which is nice open space and easy to get in and out of the building. There's restrooms right there, but it's also a main kind of corridor of traffic for students. So it's not ideal. It's not an ideal polling place, but we're still working on, are there other solutions at Central? And so those are the major kind of things that are a little bit different from previous years or even this year's calendar. It's really where spring break landed last week of March, but aligns a little more locally. And then the change of having school again on voting days, but the polling only in our intermediate and high schools. And Deidre, I don't know if you want to add anything with this one.
Just that the other thing that we always take into account in the calendar are the professional development days. And we do get a lot of feedback from staff on where we should have those or where they're best utilized. The one piece of it that we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on in the last several years is having a 2-day back-to-back professional development at some point in the year. So the rest of the professional development days are intended to be spread out so that we can do our continuous improvement cycles and continue to come back to previous learning by next year. Hopefully get back to our teacher-led professional development with showcases and things like that. But that's always a driving factor for us in the calendar, is just being able to have a 2-day back-to-back time to be able to really do some processing around our continuous improvement goals. Other than that, the rest of the calendar has gotten not a ton of feedback from our department.
So any questions for us?
So the 3 elementary specific days that are on Wednesdays, can you refresh my memory as to why Wednesdays were selected for those days for elementary planning?
So I think back through this, we opted there so that we don't create kind of long weekends out of where we place them, because then we may actually have a negative impact on attendance for families that have little kids and older kids, right? It was part of the dilemma of trying to figure out where we land that. So there wasn't a perfect place to land it, but Wednesdays this is the first year with those days included in the calendar, so it's a little hard to know if our kind of the assumption in our logic is actually playing out the way we thought. We won't know until next year, but that's what was behind it.
Okay, try to limit if we have a long weekend for elementary kids, but there's school still for upper level kids, then we would lose the upper level kids too if they don't travel or something.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Other questions or comments on the calendar? All right, we would look for a motion.
Move to approve?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any final questions or comments? Not all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that passes. Great. Marty, you mentioned too that would be communicated together with the change, or are we going to send 2 separate communications so people don't get confused between the 2 calendars?
Yeah, I'll have to talk to Beth about it. After I said that, I had the same thought in my mind. It's like, this is going to get muddled. So I think we'll do it first, the change for this year, and then maybe in a couple weeks here's the new calendar. We could at least get the new calendar posted. I know Suzette this time of year starts getting calls because people want to plan spring breaks in particular. So we could just start sharing that it's been decided for those families that are reaching out to us. We can at least share it right now.
Yeah, that would only be my only concern is that, with the change to this year's calendar, we would hate for people to get confused with next year's calendar since it is available. So thank you for considering that. Okay, so that is all of our agenda items for this evening. So then we will move on to our workshop. 11.1, our financial stability and efficiency workshop on the 2021-2022 budget calendar. Just keep going and going and going in a cycle for that budget. So Caitlin, go ahead.
Yes, that is exactly right. Once one ends, another begins. So I'm going to share my screen and walk through the calendar. I think you're seeing the calendar, right? Okay. So tonight we'll walk through the calendar, and then next Monday, the board will be set to approve it. And we'll just kind of go through now what happens throughout the budget development process. So I'll just enlarge this a little bit. So February and March are when we start working on those big ticket items within our budget. So we work through our facilities, capital improvements, we work through staffing projections and technology needs. And so that's February and March. In early March, then the board will have a workshop on the January 2021 pupil count. So as you know, there's 2 pupil counts during the year. So we'll work through the January 2021 pupil count along with early projections then for enrollment, estimated revenue limit, which at this time it's very preliminary, and then preliminary budget projections. Throughout March and April will be ongoing efforts in pursuit of changes to school funding. And March and April is really not the only time this happens. And we are going into the first year of a biennial state budget, which means the first year of their 2-year budget. And this one is probably more up in the air than it's ever been before. So we're hoping that we would get a state budget by maybe end of summer. So March and April is sort of just the beginning of us following closely to updates from the state, from DPI, from WASBO, from Baird, and then using those early projections into our budget. Through early March and through late March, early April, we'll develop our budget material packets. And recently it's been a Google Doc that schools and departments have been filling out. So they'll get those at that time. And then we'll do a budget workshop on April 26th to go over our proposed budget and preliminary tax levy at that time. And then the schools will be returning and departments will be returning their budgets in mid-May. Then our business office then takes that back and we enter those in a preliminary budget field in Skyward and review for accuracy, for year-over-year changes. We have those conversations as needed with our schools and with our departments. In mid-June, then we have another workshop with the board on our preliminary budget for the following year, for that year, for 21-22. And then the board approves that budget before we head into the beginning of that fiscal year. July 1st is when we get 8 estimates from DPI. And again, just estimates, but this helps narrow in as we go further and further. We get closer and closer to our actual numbers rather than just projections. At the end of August then is when we'll see that first publication in the newspaper for our public hearing. That will be in there, I believe, twice before the public hearing is on September 13th. We have our official third Friday pupil count in September, which is always the third Friday in September, which is why we call it the third Friday count. So this year it'll land on Friday, September 17th. On October 1st is when we get our property values from DPI, which, as we know, is an important factor in our whole calculation leading up to the mill rate, as well as on October 15th, our aid certification. So those are very important numbers for us in our calculations. And then finally, on Monday, October 25th, the board will approve and adopt our final budget. And then the very last step is certifying our tax levies to our 4 municipalities. So any questions? It's very straightforward from year to year, and really all we change are the dates that these are landing on. So not much new going on here.
Wonderful. Any questions or comments for Caitlin? So next week, Caitlin, just to reiterate, so this will be an action item on the agenda next week to approve the calendar. And then the clock starts ticking and all those items start to go into place.
Yes, and I did want to say one note as I was pulling this up, I realized there's the first bullet point under the March 8th date on the document that's posted for the board to see. It says January 2020 and it should be 2021. So that will be updated on the board book before we approve it next week.
Go ahead.
Well, you're breaking up, Steph. I didn't know if you called on me or not.
Yeah, sorry. Mhm.
Thank you. Caitlin, just wanted to thank you for everything you've done in finances since you've been in district. You've been a great addition to the team. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. All right. Anything else for Caitlin on the calendar? And again, if there's any questions in the meantime, please feel free to reach out during the week so we can make sure that questions are answered prior to being on the agenda for action next Monday. All right. If there's nothing else, we would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Stay safe. Take care of yourselves.